Hey, so first off, I want to thank all of you for attending the panel today, and Robert, Andrew, and everybody at AAS for setting this up. Um, like Gurkhan, it's morning for me here, so good morning to me, good afternoon to you all. Uh, as Robert said, my paper is entitled "Cultural and Generic Journeys in Ali Salim's The Comedy of Oedipus." And I did drop the technology ball, apparently, because I didn't make a slide presentation, so you just get roughly 10 minutes of listening to me talk. Ali Salim's 1970 The Comedy of Oedipus, You're the One Who Killed the Beast, begins by marking two journeys: a generic journey from tragedy to comedy indicated by the title, and a geographic journey from ancient Greece to Salim's Egypt, indicated by the first line of the stage directions. Thebes, the Egyptian, not the Greek Thebes. In this presentation, I want to briefly touch on how these generic and cultural transpositions provide cover for Salim's critique of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt's autocratic ruler who died the same year the play premiered. Like many Arab playwrights, Salim couches his political message in myth in order to avoid censorship. It's for this reason that he picks up the Oedipus story in the first place, though the play as Salim presents it is largely unrecognizable to those expecting Sophocles' version. In the Comedy of Oedipus, the ancient city of Thebes is threatened by a sphinx, but when the common citizen Oedipus appears to have defeated it, he is made king and marries Queen Jocasta. Tiresias warns the people that they must take care of themselves rather than look to a ruler to save them, but his wisdom is ignored. As King Oedipus devotes himself to inventing, modernizing technology by 5,000 years. However, as he works in his lab, the people are inundated with propaganda about Oedipus's supposed divinity, and any dissent or questioning is brutally repressed by the police. When the suspiciously unslain Sphinx returns, Oedipus joins Tiresias in trying to convince the people to slay it themselves, but they insist that the king can and will save them. Eventually the people attack the Sphinx, but because they live with the fear instilled in their hearts by the police state, they fail. Seeing this failure, Oedipus leaves the city. Salim's play is clearly a play for his own time and place, but locating it in history, myth, and comedy allows him to evade the censors. And these transitions facilitate Salim's pro-democratic message by creating dramatic connections and distances. Connections with Attic tragedy and its democratic ethos, and distance from direct commentary on Egyptian politics. For me, the driving force behind Salim's political project in the Comedy of Oedipus is a push for greater democracy in Egypt, and he picks one of the great Greek tragic figures to be the driving force behind this political critique. Salim's Oedipus insists as a condition for facing the Sphinx that he be appointed king, but not by the city's elite. As he explains, "It must be the people who agree to my appointment. You're capable of appointing me today and dismissing me tomorrow, but if the people appoint me, no one will know how to dismiss me." And when the Sphinx returns later in the play, Oedipus joins Tiresias in urging the people to confront the monster collectively. So despite having been made king, Oedipus rejects the complete pharaonic power allowed him by the position. In his insistence that power is properly vested in the people of Thebes, Salim's Oedipus is in stark contrast to both Sophocles' Oedipus and Nasser, both of whom ruled centralized states. Both Sophocles' Oedipus and Nasser ruled as strongmen, deciding the fates of their countries through their own will. In the Sophocles, Oedipus is warned to give up his line of questioning by Tiresias, Jocasta, and the shepherd, but he refuses to be ruled by anyone else, instead insisting on his personal quest for knowledge despite the consequences. Similarly, under Nasser's rule, Egypt's government became increasingly centralized and political critique was repressed. Both rulers built cults of personality, centralizing personal loyalty to themselves. Indeed, Safi Mahmoud Mahfouz writes of Salim's Comedy of Oedipus, "The political message the play strives to convey is a warning to the mob of the perils of developing a cult of personality for a leader." In this sense, Salim's Oedipus is the opposite of both Sophocles' protagonist and Nasser because he actively tries to dismantle the cult of personality built up around him. However, Oedipus fundamentally fails to achieve the democratic aspirations encoded in Greek tragedy, particularly values like freedom of speech and equality before the law, which Ian Story and Arlene Allen claim are enacted by tragedy as a form. While Oedipus looks the other way, Aurelia, the chief of police, builds a terror regime where he tortures anyone he even suspects of doubting the official cult narrative about Oedipus. Aurelia also claims that democratic freedom of speech reigns in Egypt, but these proclamations are mixed with threats for anyone who speaks up, especially those who try to speak anonymously. Salim clearly endorses the civic values of Greek tragedy, but his play shows that they're impossible to enact under a repressive regime that has crushed the people's spirit. It is partially to avoid repression of political speech under Nasser that Salim chose to adapt the Oedipus story and chose to make the changes which he did. As is often the case under censorious regimes, Arab playwrights frequently draw from mythology, either from Arab stories like The 1001 Nights — thank you, Stephanie, for your interesting presentation immediately before mine — or from Greek mythology to obscure political critiques. By the same logic as Brechtian epic drama, adapting mythology creates an apparent distance between the political situation and the content usually depicted on stage, which allows Egyptian or Arab playwrights much more political liberty than a play set in their own time and place. As Mohammed al-Mohana points out, the change of the setting in this version serves Salim's aim of highlighting contemporary political issues. By finding connections between Oedipus and Nasser, and by resetting the play in a different historical context, Pharaonic Egypt rather than classical Greece, and changing from a comedy to a tragedy, Salim introduces substantial ambiguity, thereby enabling both his critique of the Nasser regime and creating enough distance that the censors could approve the work. Like the translation from Greek Thebes to Egyptian Thebes, the change from Sophoclean tragedy to Salim's Comedy of Oedipus is a significant element of Salim's critique. As many scholars of Arabic drama have pointed out, there is no indigenous Arabic or Islamic tradition of tragedy, in part because the tragic worldview, with its capricious gods and arbitrary fate, is difficult to reconcile with Islamic philosophy, and because some Muslim thinkers assert that all representations of living beings are spiritually suspect. However, Arabs have a long tradition of satiric and comic poetry and performed storytelling, so Salim capitalizes on that heritage. Shifting the Oedipus myth from tragedy to comedy is another way of domesticating the play for an Egyptian audience, even though previous playwrights had already attempted, with mixed success, to create an Egyptian or Arab or Islamic version of the Oedipus tragedy, most notably Tawfiq al-Hakim and Ali Ahmad Bakatir in 1949. That's two different versions in the same year, 1949. While familiarity with Greek tragedy was not uncommon among Egyptian intellectuals and theatergoers by 1970, Salim's generic choice of satire would have been much more comfortable for many viewers. As M.M. Badawi writes, few countries produced so many plays marked by such nightmarish satiric intensity as Egypt did in the 1960s and 1970s, plays which constituted a protest against the ruthless crushing of the individual by the all-powerful machine of a totalitarian state. In other words, Salim wrote a satire as part of a larger political project among Egyptian dramatists of protesting the restrictions of the Nasser regime through dark humor. And in fact, many of Salim's other plays, like The Buffet or The Wheat Well, are also political satires. However, Salim loves to ironically undercut expectations and to challenge his audience, and the Comedy of Oedipus ends with just such an ironic challenge. Tiresias's closing lines are, "You people who live in this city and to whom I have told the story of my city, know that although you were provoked to some laughter as you listened to this story, I swear to you by all the gods that that was not my intention." In another Brechtian reversal of expectations, Salim closes the play he's adapted from a tragedy into a comedy by telling the audience they were not meant to find humor in the show. Perhaps, instead, they were meant to be awakened to political action. Thank you.